All right, give Chris the floor.
All right,
Yeah.
Chris.
Yeah,
Come on,
Chris.
Chris.
All right. So I have there's a few things that roll around through my mind, and they go kind of hand in hand with each other. Um, you can just overarch it as like justice system in America. Um, and one thing that really sticks out in my mind is um, there's a few things. One of the things is the focus of like rehabilitation versus punishment. Um, and how do we as a nation rehabilitate people who are going to prison, in jail. There are people who commit crimes where they're no longer allowed to be a part of society anymore, and they're forever in life during their duration of the rest of their life in prison. But there's also people that have a certain amount of years in jail, who in prison, who will come back into society. And it's like, if they're going to come back into society, we want them to not do the same thing that they did and become a better member of society. Right. So how do we improve our system in that? And then you also have the whole situation of mandatory sentencing and like all these different crimes that have like a same crime, like the whole instance of crack and cocaine. Basically the same thing, only that one is a heavier sentence for the same amount. And that's just completely, that itself is wrong, and that just a lot of racial undertones in that. So I just there's our whole justice system is a big thing for me, of what I've been really kind of like feeling a lot of pain over, and wanting to see a lot of change.
Yeah, I will say that this is a topic that I also am like I'm passionate about. It's what I intended for my degree, because I am 100% for rehabilitation, and I do not like the idea of punishment. I see a lot of our prison systems are trying to get groups of people off the street, out of society, out of sight, out of mind, instead of giving them the tools that they need to correct or change their behavior, so that they will be able to be released back into society and not make those same mistakes and not do those same things. It's very well known that there are certain like communities that are, there's a word for it and it's escaping me, but you're basically like going to end up in jail or dead. You have two options for your life. And things like that bother me, but I feel like it's not something that we talk enough about. And I feel like in our country as a whole, I feel like there's that subgroup of people that know and understand, but I'm worried that the larger consensus is that they deserve it, or those people shouldn't have done X, Y, or Z, and they're just criminals, because there's that isolation there. It dehumanizes them.
Yes.
And now they're no longer humans, they're criminals and they're animals and they deserve to be in jail type of thing. A few years ago, when I was deciding exactly what I wanted to do for school, I stayed up till like 2 a.m. because I knew I wanted to do something with psychology. And I stayed up till like 2 a.m. just researching, because psychology is a very broad term, researching all the different fields and stuff within psychology. And it hit me like, oh, prison counseling. And I was so excited for that. And so excited to the point I told like everybody that I came across. And everybody that I came across was like, are you crazy? Why would you want to work in a jail? Why would you want to work in a prison? You know what those people did to get in there? And I'm like, exactly. Yeah, that was, yeah, my whole
Like, do you know what those people did to get in there?
And it was something that like, it hurts, because it's like, those are people too, like those are humans. And I don't like the idea of somebody being hopeless, or somebody thinking that they're so far removed from normal society, and there's no hope for them, and they can never be good, and they can never do anything right, or nobody loves them. I don't like any of those things because I know all those things are untrue.
Yeah.
But my one supervisor tried to deter me. He tried to change my mind, and he told me to read a book called The Hot House. And it's written by this journalist who spent 2.5 years in Leavenworth prison, just hanging out with the inmates and talking to them and getting their stories. And I'm like, for one, that's exactly what I want to do. Like, I literally want to hang out with prisoners all day and talk to them and build rapport with them and build relationships with them or whatever. But then also there's that level of like treating them like humans that I feel like is missed a lot of time. But anyway, that's a small tangent. In this book, they talk about a lot of how the prison systems came to be, and how they kind of just needed bodies at one point to keep the funding and stuff like that. And then there's like this huge the issue with like Fidel Castro and everybody trying to leave Cuba, and they came into America and like immediately went to prison. So the prisons were flooded with now these minorities here in America, and they were okay with that. The prisoners were, even though they did nothing wrong, they're like, we'd rather be here than go back to Cuba type of thing. And I feel like there's so many misconceptions. This is the summary of what I'm trying to say. There's so many misconceptions about prisoners and inmates and the prison system in general, because we have this idea in our head that, oh, jail is where you go when you do something bad, or you must be a horrible person if you're in prison. But there's a lot of little nuances in there that would make that untrue, or make that not wholly true, like in its entirety. And it kind of is like a stereotype that certain types of people go to jail, and our type of people don't do this. And but there are different types of crime too that get different types of sentencing, even though one crime to the general masses like of citizens might seem worse than like money laundering, or like fraud and things like that, or having like a gram of like marijuana on you, like those
And
types of things, like those differences. And
yeah, like the thing is, you feel a double-sided, it's like, as a person who looks on into that from the outside, you feel a double side of pain, because there's people who have such horrendous crimes committed against them and their family members, and people who suffered so much that you feel their pain. And then also there's people who like commit crimes that are wrongly imprisoned, and like people who commit crimes that have such like unbearable sentences when they don't need to be that hefty, that you're like, man, like how can you really how can you come back into this society? Like when you're in there, you're constantly, if you like ask prisoners, like they're constantly on guard and always in a flight or fight state all the time, and they have to be in that like for like 30 years and then come back into a society where you don't have to always be on. They're going to still continue to that. Like the odds of them going right back to prison are high. And it's like there needs to be something to change. So yeah, I love what you said, Shaq.
Oh, I had something that I was going to piggyback off of, but I completely blanked after you finished your sentence.
well, I'll say just as an example for what Chris just said, one of the I'm gonna have to read that book again now. Got me all riled up. One of the stories in the book is about this inmate who was in there, and he had one day of leave. I'm forgetting the situation around it or whatever, but he was, and I don't remember. I think he was just like leaving in general. Like he was good. He was being released, and he was trying to make it back home, but he was out for one day before he was put back in. And they had dropped him off at the airport because he had to fly back home. But airports had changed a lot since the last time he was in society, and he didn't understand how like the airport worked or where he was supposed to go, and he was getting frustrated. So he was trying to talk to somebody, but he seemed very aggressive and angry and like just like
Unadjusted.
yeah. And the situation escalated, and he ended up being kind of like chased out of the airport. Like security was kind of like, hey, you're gonna have to calm down. And he's like, whatever, I'm done. Like, I'll find another way there. So what he knew how to do was steal cars. So he stole a car and was just gonna drive home, and got caught, arrested, and put back in jail.
Mm.
And it was such a sad situation, like reading it, because it's like if somebody would have taken the time to help him or figure out where the miscommunication was, where the disconnect was, understand that he was just confused and frustrated. And I can imagine, I've only been to an airport technically twice. I've only flown once, to and from Vegas. And there's a lot of people there.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of like, all right, we just need to get through this line. We just need to, so I can understand maybe somebody not taking the time to stop for each individual passenger and things like that. But I feel like that situation could have been avoided. And then the man went right back in jail. Like things like that
Yeah.
are just so unfortunate to me. But I feel like they happen often. There's a lot of examples in the book, but I feel like they happen often. But for somebody on the outside, it might be easy to say, oh, well, he just should have said, I don't understand what's going on. Somebody on the outside didn't like, well, he should have never stolen the car. That's what happened, the first time around. But there's a lack of empathy there and understanding, even trying to understand it from his point of view, that could change the whole situation if we thought a little bit differently.
I mean, I fly a lot and I get frustrated in airports, and I'm used to it. And I also don't believe I come across as aggressive or anything. But I have been told to calm down by police officers in the airport before. And I was like, I need people to move. I got to get to my flight. I'm making a connection flight. I got to go. They're like, sir, you need to calm down. I'm like, I've got 2 minutes to get there.
Yeah.
And that's me used to high stress levels and low stress levels, having the flux, already being familiar with airports. So how would we expect? It's the double standard society.
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 Society is to blame.
But it's frustrations.
It is tough, and I remembered what I was going to say earlier. Shaq and I, we took marriage and family together, but there was another class we had to take, behavior modification.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things we learn is we do learn about punishment, but we also learn about reinforcement.
Yeah.
And the general consensus is reinforcement is probably better in terms to modify behavior, because a punishment, regardless if it's positive or a negative punishment, it's still a punishment. Like the person is going to react to it in different ways. You never know how somebody's going to react to a punishment. The person can like for me specifically, if I got a spanking as a child and I wouldn't do that thing again, because that's a punishment. My parents also did timeouts. They also did grounding, like the older I got. But as I got older, I started getting angry at the punishments, because I was I was learning and I was getting over, and I'm like, well, this isn't fair. I was maturing. I'm like, rebel teenager, like, you can take away my freedom, but I still got my imagination, because that's a big part of my life, like my imagination and all the stuff that I got up here going around. So even though if I was punished, I still looked at it like I wasn't, but I was still angry that I got punished. I knew not to do it again, but I was still angry, and that definitely changed my attitude towards my parents.
I think the idea that we have, it's generally accepted that when you go to jail, your rights are taken away.
Yep.
But I feel like that's an incorrect narrative. It should be your privileges that are taken away.
Mm.
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah, I love that.
We all have basic rights as human beings,
Mhm.
and to deny somebody their basic right. This is going to sound awful, but there's a prisoner in the book who's my favorite. He's in there for life. He's not getting out. And he was put into solitary confinement over next to nothing. But it was the guards and the warden picking on him and antagonizing him to try to make him violent so that they could punish him. And they had him in a cell in the basement. It was basically a cage. It was like all like just this huge like room, and it was like cement floor or whatever. And where he was, there was like one light there, and it wasn't even like over his cage. But where he was, there was a leak in the ceiling that just dropped on him like all day long. And it's like little things like that that I'm like, you're expecting somebody to go into jail, serve their time, and leave feeling differently about the world, or are you reinforcing whatever negative thoughts they already have about the world and showing them and teaching them that whatever negative thoughts they had before are correct? You know, you do have to look out for yourself. You can't trust people. Other people are against you. You have to do everything on your own. Or should we be teaching them, like, if you need help, reach out to somebody? We should be teaching them about like community assistance programs and things like that. We should have more of those things. We should be teaching them if they have an angry disposition or a propensity to be angry and explode, how to control their anger, how to express themselves in a way that will get their point across without deteriorating a conversation. Like, those are things that should be taught, but we stick people in a cell and kind of ignore them and forget about them, while this narrative exists on the outside that, oh, you deserve to have your rights taken away.
Mm-hmm.
But it's your privileges.
I love that. I love
Just
that.
makes me sad. I
That
don't
that
like people feeling not human.
that was something you and I talked about actually too, Shaq. On your birthday weekend, no less, was do people in prison have the right to vote? And I can't remember.
Yeah.
Like it was very nuanced from like state to state, and it was like a certain number of years after the fact. Or some people, it was like while they were in prison they couldn't vote. Some places they could, but some they couldn't. And then it was after a certain number of years they could go register to vote again, and some of them immediately after they get out they can go register to vote. They just have to go register to vote again. So I don't know what my point was there, but I just thought that was interesting. That
Go ahead.
What?
No, go ahead. Finish your sentence.
No, that was it. Like, I don't know where I was going.
I'm terrible. Some of it has come from systemic racism on how we want to put certain people in a prison, and then Jim Crow laws, which is a whole other conversation to have, but it does factor into this and how we treat those with both rehabilitation. And I love that the idea of your privileges versus your rights being taken away. Which is why juries are meant to be made of people who don't know the victim.
So
go ahead.
I do have a question. Because in terms of voting, would you consider that a right or a privilege? Because I hear people say the right to vote, but I also hear other people saying it's a privilege to vote.
Well, if you want to look at how America originally treated it, it was a very poignant way of them saying very creatively who they want to vote and why. I personally believe, and this is my opinion, I think it should be a privilege, and here is why. Those with mental disorders sometimes do not always think of, I'm saying this because my personal experience with relatives and with people who have been aggressive towards me and life, some of them have had mental disorders that have impacted the rational thought of how to think clearly and conscientiously. Becomes a very quickly stubbly road of how do you determine whether someone is conscientious enough to vote, who is slightly on a spectrum, or is full-fledged, or are we going to stop people who are medicated, or if they are medicated and they're functional? How do we know that they're functional? And then how do we decide between, well, what if you have a mental handicap? Or where does the line get drawn? But I do think, because going back, some of the original voting, you had to pay to vote, and people were too poor to vote because they wanted a certain demographic voting. And I totally respect businesses. If they want to make that when you come in, you have to wear a black suit and tie. All right, that's their right to do that, right? It is your right if you show up there, and they can deny admittance. They can't deny it based on who you are, but they can do it on something as trivial as what you're wearing. Do we demand that people have an education to vote? I mean, it would help, but how many people are also educated who are also not educated, who are also incredibly, competent? So it comes down to that this almost, I would have to do more research, obviously, but I do think it's more of a privilege than a right to vote. But then how do we rule that out? So my opinion on that might have to change. It's I don't have enough facts, I'll be honest. And that kind of goes back to that earlier conversation. You have nothing to say. We don't know the facts. Don't say something. Mm-hmm. But I do think it is something for us to be aware of, that this is something we need to educate ourselves on. Where do we go from here? There were some people that I've heard recently say, well, we should decriminalize the old Jim Crow laws about voting on certain demeanors, or misdemeanors, excuse me, so that we can get the right people in. I don't disagree with that sometimes, and sometimes I do. And when we start picking and choosing what we want, that becomes the issue. We need to, again, be consistent in everything. Mm-hmm. But I hope this has at least spurned some thought.
Definitely.
And just an interesting perspective that we may not have encountered before. Yeah. So how do we determine who decides anything? State versus, small government, big government, Mm-hmm. This becomes very messy. But it doesn't mean it shouldn't be talked about. Right. If it's uncomfortable, we should be talking about it.
Mm-hmm. And politics in general are very messy.
Yes.
Like we mentioned voting, and there's a lot of people out there that still think they can't go vote. And I'm not seeing, the only place that I'm seeing say that you can't go vote is more towards the radical left. And I don't understand what they're getting at, because you just have to be registered in the city that you live, and you need your ID.
Right.
And I don't know anyone that does not carry an ID on them. Now, like I say in all my videos, there's always an exception to the rule. Sure. But yeah, politics just it gets really messy, and the whole systemic racism thing and Jim Crow laws. A lot of we are still seeing it's 50 years later, and we are still seeing a lot of backlash from that. 50 years from now, we might not. I hope we might not. But their laws are getting changed, and I'm gonna get real here with you a moment. So laws are actually being changed. Civil rights laws are being changed, specifically in California. You are now able to discriminate based on skin color in California. I don't know why they thought that was a good idea to get rid of that law, but they can now discriminate on skin color. I also don't know the purpose of it. That's scary to me, having something like that taken away. I realize that's a really heavy topic.
I want to know more about that. What?
Yeah.
What kind of thing? What kind of thing happened
Yeah.
to let someone make that a law? Like, my
I
goodness.
don't know. I'll be honest with you guys. Most of my day, right now at least, since all this has happened, is staying plugged into the news. I get bombarded like every single day with like 50 videos of like news reels, and I'm getting my news from like CNN and like ABC and Fox News. Unfortunately, CNN and ABC are no longer covering like the race issue going on in America. They went back to the coronavirus, and I'm like, okay, old news. Like, I know it's still current news, but that's not my immediate issue right now. Fox News is still covering the protests and everything, and a lot of the alternative media I watch covers it as well.
Well, I can answer that question, why they're not covering it.
Okay.
Having studied media in great depth, which was the main focus of my degree, had to do with its ratings. Look at what people watch each of those channels.
Mhm.
Look at the demographic. Who wants to hear about what? So it's that when there's always been a spin to the news, there's always been a spin to the outsourcing of information. So it comes down to who's your demographic, what viewing and ratings do you want? That's why certain companies close. That's why some of them stay open. Well, maybe the advertisers are tired of hearing it and they want them to move on. Like there is all, that's something I hope we all remember. And Facebook is guilty of this too. Everyone has a political agenda or a personal agenda. And it depends on, I mean, for some people, it's some people determine what's factual by cross-referencing a ton of resources and hoping that the consistency is key. Unfortunately, sometimes there's only one source that quotes it, and that source happens to be right, which is why I think right now, this is the time for us, whether you agree or disagree with anything that's going on, you should be there to witness it yourself, because two people can be at a car accident and see two different car accidents. So my question to a lot of my students is, during this time, what are you doing? If you're staying at home and hiding from it, that's wrong. If you're staying at home for a different reason, like for safety, you don't have like the means to go out, that's one thing. But we are literally witnessing history right now. And you know what's funny is every year we're witnessing history. Why are we refusing to get involved?
Yeah. That's it's funny you mentioned the ratings because Fox News Tucker Carlson actually has the highest ratings right now in the nation of just mainstream media, because he's still covering the protests and the riots and everything, because he's still covering the race issue. And I think that speaks volumes that the public is more immediately concerned with that than these other news sources, and people are actually calling for him to run for president, believe it or not.
Not Kanye?
Oh, I haven't gotten to. I'm so far behind on those videos. I haven't even gotten there yet. He's on my list to watch. Like, oh God, it's so many. I'm so far behind. And like what Jasenia said earlier, sometimes you just need a break and just kind of like laugh. Like I'll go and watch some sort of stupid thing that has nothing to do with anything and just feel good for like half a second, because my brain hurts. My brain hurts with all this information. But yeah, what was I talking about? I haven't eaten today.
It's not good. I didn't fuss at you about that, but that's not good.
Yeah.
Are we still on Chris's or are we gonna
I think so.
We're still on Chris's. We kind of moved from like the justice system to like politics and stuff, and then the media, which is good. That's how conversations should work. You move from one topic to the other because they're related.
River. Yes.
But yeah.
Yeah, it's something to think about.
Did you wanted to say something, T?
Me? No.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I think I did, but it's long flown out of my head. But maybe one day it'll come back and I can talk about it. So.
Okay.
Yeah.